Welcome to Boil the Frog Slowly, a radio program that goes where corporate media stops, where each week we ask the questions: are politics hazardous to your health? Are the decisions and incremental changes being made by government and industry creating health problems? What are they? Why don't you know about them? What can you do about it? Not only do we ask the questions, we furnish answers with unparalleled documentation, research, studies, and guests from around the globe with proof that unequivocally show that yes, politics are hazardous to your health, and you had better be informed before it's too late. Boil the Frog Slowly. A cute name? No. It's what's happening right now to you and me and the rest of the world as we placidly float in a slowly simmering pot of subtle changes. And those who hold the recipe to this agenda count on the fact that we won't notice the heat until we're sufficiently boiled, unable to resist. I'm Pat.
And I'm Sebastian.
And today we're stirring the pot. Thanks for joining us. Sebastian, we've got a great guest today.
Yes, we do.
All right, let me tell you a little bit about her. Her name is Dafna Tachover, a lawyer with an MBA with 10 plus years of multidisciplinary international business and legal experience. As a result of getting sick from wireless radiation, she now focuses on protecting the rights of people who got injured by this technology, forces government action, and educates people about the inherent and well-documented adverse health effects of this technology. So I know we have so much to talk about. Welcome to the show, Dafna.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Why don't you start? Well, just tell us a little bit about your journey. I know that you practice law in Israel and New York and found that you were getting sick from wireless technology. Tell us, what were your symptoms? How did you come to realize your own diagnosis?
Okay, so I'll start by saying that I used to love the wireless technology. And then 5 years ago, in July it's going to be 5 years ago, happily I went to buy a new laptop. I decided to start my own law practice. After a long business and legal career, I wanted to have children, and I just wanted to have my own law practice, not to be dependent on anyone. And so I went to buy a new laptop, and I came home happy, and I opened the computer, and something was wrong with the computer. The area left to on the left side of the mouse was vibrating, and I started feeling tingling in my fingers and in my feet. And I don't know, I immediately thought that something was wrong with the computer, and maybe it's giving me static electricity, and that's why I was feeling those, numbness in the feet and the hands. And so, I got up from the computer, the symptoms went away, I went back to the computer, the symptom returned. So I just dismissed it. I just said, something wrong, I'll return the computer the next day, and I'll get a new computer. So the next day I go to the store, I return the computer, they confirmed that something was defective, and I got a new laptop. So I come home, and the same thing happens. The computer was not vibrating, but something else was wrong, and I started having additional symptoms. I noticed that it's difficult for me to be working on a computer, and my face would become red. I had difficulties breathing, and various other symptoms. So I thought I have really bad luck. So I go the next day, return the computer, say, thank you, please give me my money back, and I'll get my computer somewhere else. I decided to get a different computer model, and I went to another store. I got a new laptop. I come back home, same thing happened. And that's when it became really weird. Third computer defective, and me having various symptoms. I decided to take the computer to an Apple lab. And I took the computer, and I told them that this is the third laptop I'm buying. All three had various defects, and I'm getting symptoms. And I asked them to check the computer and confirm that it's wrong, and that something is wrong with the computer, that I'm not imagining what's going on. So 20 minutes later, they're coming back and telling me, yes, something is wrong with the computer. I returned the third computer. This time I went to the Apple store and purchased my computer there. Same thing happened. I returned my fourth computer. At that point, I understood that something was not right, and I decided not to buy a computer. I spoke to my husband at the time, who is an MD and had an additional PhD in molecular biology. He was working for Princeton University. We talked to a professor he was working with, and he suggested that maybe the chemicals in the computer were affecting me or something was wrong. So for 3 weeks, I decided I'm not going to touch my computer. But weirdly enough, I'm trying to talk on my cell phone, which I use very often, and I cannot touch my cell phone. And whenever I put it to my head, I would get very sharp pain in my head. So now I cannot use my cell phone as well. Then after 3 weeks, the symptoms did not disappear. I tried to buy a desktop. I got the same symptoms as desktop, and I understood that there is a problem here. Shortly after, a friend of mine, whose husband is a professor at Harvard, sent me an article in Prevention magazine, and they discussed the same symptoms. My feeling that it had to do with electricity, at the time I didn't know exactly what type of electricity I'm reacting to, was confirmed. And then other weird things started to happen. I would lie on the bed and I would get pain in my head. I noticed that behind me there is a socket. If I move to the other side, I don't get the pain. I go back to my side, I get the pain. So it was a whole process of noticing that I'm starting reacting to various things.
Now, Dafna, can you share with us, since you mentioned your husband was an MD, what was his take on your symptoms, being
That's
a formal
actually an
MD?
embarrassing story for me. He was an MD, and he was actually had a PhD in microbiology, and he was not practicing medicine. He was actually a scientist, a researcher. And I used to speak on the cell phone a lot, both for work and personal. And whenever he used to see me speaking on the phone, he would just say, "Dafna, please put down the phone, even for 10 minutes." And I am embarrassed to say that I never, ever asked him, why does he tell me to put down the cell phone? And when he used to tell me that, I remember the thought in my head was, okay, worst case scenario, I guess cancer when I'll be 60. I guess that's what everyone else thinks. And I am not 60 yet. I did not get brain cancer, but I think I got a much worse condition. And after that, when he saw what happened, it was clear. I mean, there was no doubt. I still can prove in a few minutes that, that this is what's causing my symptoms.
So your husband did have some awareness that there was scientific proof that this radiation was hazardous?
Yeah, he's a pretty brilliant person who is well aware of everything scientific out there. And when I got sick, he started to do some work on it. He wrote some papers with Deborah Davis, but this is not his topic of research. But it was clear for him, as it for anyone else who met me, that this is what's causing my symptoms. There was no doubt there.
Well, what's interesting is that everything you're saying correlates with all the other interviews you can find on the internet, and plus people we've interviewed on Boil the Frog Slowly. For example, Eunice St. Clair with Citizens for Safe Technology. She was a very heavy cell phone user for a long time. And in fact, she and her husband owned a cell phone business.
Yes.
And it's the people that with the heavy use and the long-term exposure that end up coming down with a hypersensitivity or actually are able to feel the radiation like you and me and other people. It's that cumulative exposure that's the key factor here.
I think you're right that it is the key factor, but I'm not sure I agree about that these are the people who get sick. I actually have right now staying in my house a woman who is a judge from Germany who also became electrosensitive, and she's been sick for over 10 years. And for her, it was actually not a cumulative exposure. She hardly ever used a cell phone. She did not have a cordless phone. She hardly used this technology at all, and she still got sick. And I think that mainly there's some people who never could use that technology. They had an inherent sensitivity to that. I think you had another program with Amir Borenstein from NORAD4U.
Yes.
He could not touch a cell phone for moment one. But then there is a group, as you said, who are the heavy users. And you also have, but now these heavy users, everyone's now heavy users because the exposure is no longer voluntary. You have very high level of exposure all around you in the environment. You go to, in your house, whether or not you have Wi-Fi, you get the Wi-Fi from your neighbor. You go to school, you're exposed to Wi-Fi. You go to your office, you're exposed to Wi-Fi, and they put various, antenna, cell phone antenna boosters in the offices without people's knowledge. So it's no, whether or not you're going to be sick has nothing to do with your personal choice anymore.
No, you're absolutely right. There is no personal choice, and I stand corrected. The other aspect to this issue has to do with dirty electricity as well. I'd like to mention that because my own mother has hypersensitivity. It's called EHS, electrical hypersensitivity, and the E, electrical, is the key word there because my mother never used cell phones or wireless, but she was exposed to dirty electricity in her home for many, many years, probably over 20 years. The wiring in her walls right next to her bed where she would sleep were blasting her with EMFs. And because of that long-term exposure, now she's just as sensitive to Wi-Fi or cell phones as I am. It's definitely tied in.
Well, I think it was, I mean, people became electrosensitive long before wireless technology. And, but again, I think that this exponential increase in sickness with electrosensitivity is definitely caused by wireless technology. There are other factors, as you said, the dirty electricity, power lines. You had in Sweden, Sweden recognized electrosensitivity as disability. The recognition was not as a result of sickness from wireless technology. It was actually the result of sickness from people using their computers without wireless technology. Mm-hmm. So EHS can be caused also by low frequencies, as you said, but I think that the main cause right now for this sickness is the wireless technology.
Oh, absolutely. And you brought up a very important point that there's no longer any freedom of choice. It's being forced into schools, so children are bathing in it all day long, or at your job. Can you share with us your issues as far as working as an attorney? Are you able to function anywhere with the Wi-Fi?
Not really. I mean, I was one of those who were unlucky and got extremely electrosensitive. I could feel Wi-Fi from 300 yards and cell phone antennas from 4 miles away, and so I was really. I couldn't tolerate light. I couldn't tolerate sound. So I had to really retire from society, and I moved to an isolated area in the mountains, and so. Most of the past 5 years, I could not even go to a store to buy my groceries, and I really could not interact with humans at all. So practicing law in a court that's found in a city with people with cell phone is something that is just not possible. But I decided that, something bad is going on, and there's a huge cover-up. And people are getting sick, and people do not have how to live, and I just cannot sit quietly and do nothing. Mm-hmm. And I was starting to work on various possible cases, but then I learned that the Israeli government, although allegedly announcing that its policy is that wired internet should be used in schools, is actually acting to the contrary and installing Wi-Fi in schools. And I couldn't tolerate the thought that children will become as sick as I can, and I decided to take action to prevent this. And I initiated a lawsuit in Israel after much correspondence with the government and trying to stop them from continuing to install Wi-Fi. When those efforts were unsuccessful, I initiated a lawsuit in the Israeli Supreme Court to ban Wi-Fi in schools, to get an injunction against the government that will ban the Wi-Fi in schools. And we started this action in August 2012. I submitted the lawsuit together with other plaintiffs. National Parents Organization joined us, and another organization which fights to limit the use of cell phones. We were 3 initial plaintiffs, and then we were added by another family of a father, mother, and 2 children who also joined the lawsuit. And happily, after 20 months in court, on April 23rd, we actually got the first injunction, which is called a conditional injunction, which basically means that the court is convinced by our claims, and the court gave the government last chance to now to argue why it cannot install wired internet, especially considering the government itself said that wired internet should be installed, and unless the government will convince the court that wired internet cannot be installed, the court said that a permanent injunction would be issued against the government. So on July 15th, the Israeli government is supposed to give its response to the court, and after that, probably a hearing will be scheduled, and then that will be the last stage of the case.
And then what will happen if it moves in your favor?
It means that, I cannot, nobody can say exactly what will be the wording of such a decision, what exactly will be the instructions of the court, but essentially it will be a permanent injunction that will ban Wi-Fi in school, which will mean that the Ministry of Education would not be allowed, not only not be allowed to install Wi-Fi, would not be allowed to any Wi-Fi being operated in any school in Israel.
Wow, that'd be huge,
This is huge. And you brought up Amir Bornstein from No Rad for You.
Yeah.
We really enjoyed our interview with him. And one thing we learned from him is that the court system in Israel is much different than here in the United States. Apparently, according to him, it's much easier for a court case to be brought forward there.
It's a different system, but not a different system. There is a kind of a parallel. The type of action we brought is we bring a case directly to the Supreme Court when it acts as a high court of justice, and in its role as a high court of justice, you bring to this court cases in which you contest the legality of decisions of state authorities. This is the only way you can really contest decisions of state authorities. And in such case, basically you bring in action for an injunction. So in such cases, the court, you go directly to the Supreme Court. You don't have to go through various levels of the court system. However, I'm not sure that to say that it's easy to get injunction. It's easy to get those injunctions because these are very difficult cases because you have the separations of power. The court does not want to intervene with government decision because the court does not want to rule the country, and the court will use this power to issue an injunction against the government very scarcely and very carefully. And our case is 6269. It means that there were 6,200 cases against the government in that year. And out of these cases, most of the cases that are submitted are being dismissed immediately. Others are dismissed after first hearing, and very, very few get injunction. So it's not easy to get an injunction against the government. The burden of proof is very high. It's not enough to show that the actions of the government are unreasonable or wrong or there was a bad judgment. You have to show extreme unreasonableness on the part of the government, which is clearly not easy. So while the system is different, you have more or less a similar avenue in the Supreme Court in the U.S., but it's easier, I think, because the proceedings are probably less expensive, and we do have this avenue which we use often.
Yeah, but Dafna, just so our listeners are especially aware of this one thing that you did, it was so important that you had the foresight to fight to make the government, or I think it was the Israeli Ministry of Education, you actually led a battle to force them to make a statement that they recommend Wi-Fi not be installed in schools and that schools use plugged-in equipment. Now,
well, yeah, it was a long battle in a sense. First, we submitted the lawsuit against the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Environmental Protection, which is the ministry in Israel responsible to set up the safety standards on electromagnetic fields. When we submitted the lawsuit, as I said, there was an intergovernmental committee which the conclusion of this committee was that wired internet should be preferred in schools. However, we believe that this committee's intentions were not to really try and make schools install wired internet, but actually the opposite. And after I was corresponding with the committee, trying to force them to issue a more stringent recommendations that basically will instruct schools to not just to recommend them to install wired internet, but instruct them to install wired internet. When this committee did not make such recommendation, we approached the government, the ministers, and we gave them last chance before we submit the case. Because before you go to the Supreme Court, you have to show that you exhausted all options. When we did that, when we approached the Minister of Health, Minister of Education, and Minister of Minister of Environmental Protection, the Minister of Health actually supported our action. And he wrote a letter to the Minister of Education and asked him to stop this program to put Wi-Fi in schools. The Minister of Education did not respond, and then we submitted the lawsuit. And when we submitted the lawsuit, the government was cornered because basically we showed that although the government writes that wired internet should be preferred, in reality it was actually the one to push and install the Wi-Fi in schools. I guess the government was afraid that the court will issue immediately an injunction. And so the government said to the court, wait, we just got this recommendation now, and we're just actually considering what to do now, and we were just about to issue a decree to the school, and we asked for more time. So the government was cornered when we submitted the lawsuit. As a result, it did issue a decree in which it tells schools that they should put wired internet, and wireless internet is allowed only if two safety inspector would say that the wired network would create some safety hazard. Then they came back after doing that, which we were surprised, considering we knew the real policy is to install Wi-Fi. A few months passed, and then the government came back to the court and said, listen, the schools are approaching us, they cannot install the wired internet, we asked for another committee. So they kept on coming for the next 20 months in court with various ridiculous claims and requests, and we're just going to do this now, and we're going to do that, and we're going to check this. So they were basically constantly trying to buy time in which they try to create reality on the ground that will put Wi-Fi in all the schools while the lawsuit is continuing, which was dishonest. And eventually the court did see that, and that's why the court issued the injunction. And I think that, I do think that the main reason the court issued the injunction is the data we exposed to the court about EHS. I think that the most groundbreaking decision of the court was in July. In that decision, the court, in that ruling, it was July 18th, 2013, after us claiming about EHS and showing to the court that the safety standard is a sham, and that the government does not take any action to check the effects of this radiation, and that there are many people who are sick with electrosensitivity, the court ruled and asked the government to check how many children suffer from EHS. And that was really the major turn point in that case. And
so did they do some studies then to actually find a definitive number of how many students are suffering from EHS?
Well, the thing is, the way this court works, it did not give an order to check. It asked the government to check. But when the Supreme Court asks you to check, it's the same as if the Supreme Court tells you, go and check. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly, if the government would have gone and checked how many children are EHS, it would have created a huge problem to the government. Because if they find even one child who suffers from EHS, then that's admitting that the safety standard is not safe, that people do get sick from this radiation, which is something the government cannot admit. Because such admittance will mean that heavy damages lawsuits against the government, and it will require from the government to change its policy on wireless radiation. So that was not possible on the part of the government. So the government went back in November. The government was supposed to give an answer, And instead of actually checking how many children are sick, the government wrote a letter to the court from the Ministry of Health saying that electrosensitivity does not exist, that it may be a psychological condition, etc., etc. But we were prepared that that's what the government will do, because it was clear for us that the government cannot afford to find electrosensitive schools in children in a school system. So we actually prepared, at the same time, we were conducting our own inquiry. And we did get complaints of parents whose children became electrosensitive, and we also conducted in one school a limited inquiry. And in that school, we found at the time 21 children with symptoms of electrosensitivity. We did not have the resources and time to check each and every one, but we confirmed at least for 6 out of the 21 children that the cause for the symptoms is the radiation from wireless technology.
And is that information submissible in court?
I'm sorry?
Are your results for those studies?
Yes, we submitted affidavits from the parents as to the symptoms of the children. Some of the children were checked by a doctor. And just like everywhere else, we have very few doctors who are familiar with this condition, and even fewer who are willing to check the children and confirm that the cause is radiation, because that would be against the policy of the Ministry of Health. But we did have some good doctors, and one doctor did check some of the children and confirmed that the symptoms are caused by radiation. And we did submit the affidavit of the parents. We submitted affidavit as to 12 children, and we submitted a letter from a 17-year-old boy who actually wrote us on his own initiative and told us, what he's experiencing in school, which was a very heartfelt letter. And the court got convinced, apparently, because after, the government argued as for EHS, we responded to the government's claims on EHS and showed that every and each sentence the government, every and each claim of the government in its letter regarding EHS is ridiculous and not scientifically based and false. And in addition, we submitted the affidavit as to the sick children. And as a result, the court issued a decision in which it asked the government once again to get the data regarding EHS, which means that since the government argued in EHS, we argued at EHS, and now the court asked again for the data, it means that the court actually takes our side. It was the first confirmation that, we are in the right way for an injunction. The government once again did not provide the data. And before a hearing was scheduled for April, and before the hearing, I submitted to court another statement, and in it I said that the government is actually hiding data, because by that time, the government was informed about over 100 children who were sick with EHS. So it's not only that the government did not check how many children are EHS, the data that the government did have, because parents did approach the government and informed about their sick children, it did not provide the court, despite the court's specific ruling that that data will be provided. And I guess that pissed off the court enough. And we had the hearing on April 23rd, in which the court once again expressed its dissatisfaction with the fact that the government did not provide the data. And the court issued the injunction.
I like the members of your court. I'd like their names so I can send them all flowers.
I'm in favor. The thing is, one of the reasons I decided Israel is my home country, and I was an attorney in Israel. I was working for the district attorney in Israel in Jerusalem, and I appreciate the legal system in Israel. I appreciate the courts, and the court system in Israel is a good court system. Like everywhere else, you have good judges, bad judges, but overall the system works, and especially the Supreme Court. It's an extremely good Supreme Court. And so when I decided to submit this case, I couldn't believe that you can come with your, the science is on your side, human rights are on your side, and truth is on your side, and justice is on your side. I just could not believe that I would not win.
Right.
It cannot be such a situation. We'll be completely right and we still lose. So I wanted to continue to believe in the decency of the court system, and I'm glad I'm right. It's been a long journey so far, and it's still not over.
Well, that was a big help for you because you're in the middle of another case right now in the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, well, it's not exactly the middle. Yes, but I'm involved in another case in the U.S. The one thing, I mean, clearly, when I submitted the case, the Israeli case, I had to learn, I learned before, but of course I had to make sure I know everything that I should and can know about electrosensitivity, about the science about electrosensitivity, and any related science on the topic. And of course, when you have that knowledge, it's much easier to argue any case on EHS. And this case, there is a wonderful person in the United States. His name is Arthur Furstenberg, and he has been electrosensitive for 30 years. And he's been fighting nonstop for the past 30 years. And after many years that he's been trying desperately to find one place he could live in, and as you know, it's becoming more and more difficult. Eventually, he did find one house in Santa Fe in which he felt well. But then a person that he knew, and a person who knew that he's electrosensitive, and a person that he helped find that house moved to the next door house. And immediately when she moved, she started to use heavily wireless gadgets, and he immediately became sick again. And as for this case, so Arthur submitted this case, and the district court dismissed his case. The district court ruled that the district court asked that Arthur would go through an experiment. They wanted him to be in his house for 6 months, and then expose him to radiation. And every 8 minutes, he'll have to say whether or not the radiation exists, which is a human experiment. So they want to force him to be exposed to radiation that can kill him, that can damage him for 6 months nonstop, and he cannot have a life, be exposed to life-threatening radiation. And he did not agree. So the court dismissed the case, and in addition, the court ruled that EHS is not a recognized cognition. It's probably psychological. And Arthur decided to appeal the case justly, and we decided that we want to submit something called amicus brief, which is the Latin word for a friend of the court, which will explain to the appellate court that Arthur's condition is not suffered only by Arthur, but this is a worldwide problem and a very difficult and widespread problem. And that unlike the first instance court ruling that electrosensitivity is not a recognized condition and is a psychological condition, it is a real condition recognized and physiological and caused by electromagnetic fields. And we were very proud that 94 organizations from 22 countries joined that brief. Wow. And we submitted a brief on June 2nd, and now we're waiting for the ruling of the court whether or not the court is going to accept this brief, because the court doesn't have to. We are not a side to the case. A plaintiff and defendant in a case. We are neither. We are just friends of the court, asking the court to listen to something that we have to say that may be important for the purpose of this proceeding.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good.
Yeah. Dafna, I want to understand. So you said when you first presented this case, the court suggested that he go back to his home and be subjected to radiation every 8 minutes.
That's what the district court ruled. Arthur, I don't know. Arthur's brief that he submitted to appeal court is brilliant. He started the brief by saying that, in Salem with witch hunting, if you wanted to prove that you're not a witch, they will put you into the water with weights connected to you. If you drown, then you were not a witch.
That's a great correlation.
Who was going to
kind of the equivalent. So Arthur would be in his house, be exposed to this radiation that caused him heart palpitation, various muscle problems, brain problems.
Maybe death.
He'll die, then yes, he was right. He was suffering from that.
Who was going to administer this bolts of radiation every 8 minutes?
A ridiculous doctor who had no background in conducting such tests. And and I have to say that Arthur submitted to the court 9 opinions of doctors determining that he suffered from EHS. There's 2 administrative court rulings that he should get disability for his electrosensitivity. He was tested by 2 psychologists that determined that he suffered from non-psychological condition. Nevertheless, the court decided that to basically exclude all his expert opinion, exclude his medical, all the doctors that submitted affidavits on his behalf, and dismiss his case.
Obviously, we're seeing that everything hinges on who are the members of the court. We look at your results in Israel with getting Wi-Fi out of schools. Everything is happening in your favor based on who is sitting on the court. And look at in comparison, what's happening there in New Mexico. The members of that court are the exact opposite as your experience in Israel, and can actually jeopardize this man's life. I mean, it's
I'm shocked at that
unthinkable.
It is an outrageous decision, and listen, it is part of the legal system. I mean, of course, we want to believe that the legal system is a justice system, but it's not. Much of every decision and every case will be depend on the judge who's heading the case. There's no way around it. And but I mean, I do want to hope that the district court judge type of decisions do not happen very often. It's really a wrong decision legally. And I cannot compare really, and I don't want to say bad things of any judge or good things. I'm really happy that we have a good Supreme Court, and I'm really happy that the court listened. And I have no doubt that any court that will listen to any court that will properly listen to the arguments of people who are bringing these cases have no choice but accept these cases. Every court that will listen to arguments showing the harmful effects of electromagnetic fields cannot rule otherwise. The data is unequivocal. You cannot say that this technology is not harmful. Any ruling that says the opposite is uninformed decision.
Exactly. And now you're doing another video. Did you do a recent video?
Well, I did not do. I participated in a film that was produced by Time Magazine on electrosensitivity. The movie was initiated, produced, and directed by a friend of mine, which I approached when I became sick with AHS. And after telling him what happened to me, I was very disappointed because on our first phone conversation, he doubted me. I couldn't believe that he actually doubted what I'm telling him. But a year later, he called me and he said that, he researched it and he wants to make a movie about it. And exactly at the same time, I was supposed to leave the house I was living in, and I needed to find a house. And clearly, if you suffer from extreme electrosensitivity, finding a house where you have no radiation is kind of almost impossible in this world.
Yeah.
And so he decided that will be the topic of the movie, how difficult it is to live in a wild world if you are suffering from electrosensitivity. And so for the next few months, he followed me trying to find this one house in which I could live. And then, of course, we added some other people to the movie, other people who were experiencing the same kind of circumstances. And each of them found a different solution to the situation. And I'm really happy with the results of the movie, and you can see them on Time website.
And what's the name of the movie?
A Golden Cage. Search for the Golden Cage.
Search for the Golden Cage.
Yes, search for a Golden Cage. You can see it on, is it time.com?
Yeah, it's on Time Magazine website, yeah.
And it's also on your awesome blog called EHS Fight Back.
Yeah.
The link is there. Also, Lloyd Burrell from Electric Sense made a nice page with that video.
And a lot of people commented there. I mean, everything he does is fantastic. He's doing a fantastic job.
Now, I watched the Search for a Golden Cage. It was about 12 minutes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. It was very well done. Now, I watched you. Actually, I felt like I was watching myself because I've been through all that with my family too. Searching for a new home, getting driven out by this radiation. Now, at the end of the video, it looked like they were building a new cell tower where you found your home. Is that what happened?
Yeah. Apparently, I mean, it was when they came to film the follow-up. It was, I think, a day or 2 days after I just learned vaguely that something is going to happen. And it's actually the same week I was also informed that they're starting to put wireless electric meters. I don't want to say smart meters because they're stupid meters. So I was really overwhelmed that week. But I learned better, and it was not a cell tower, but emergency system tower, which is, not different. It's different frequency.
Right.
And I did try and fight it, and of course I knew that I would not really succeed. The only thing we did succeed to do is to guarantee that they would not put they would not rent or lease space on that tower to cell phone companies. So it will be purely for emergency system purposes. And my house where I lived was really, really, we found an amazing spot, so there was no radiation, no cell phone reception, no neighbors, no nothing. So it was really a fantastic small white zone. And actually, but the funny thing, I had to leave the house the same month the movie came out. So I had to look for another house. So now I'm in a different house, which is more affected by all of those antennas.
Oh my gosh, this is quite a tale, and it's so beautiful though that you've taken had the opportunity to share that with others, because I know so many more people are out there seeking that refuge, and
it is horrible. I get on a daily basis dozens of emails and phone calls from people who are so desperate, and it's just heartbreaking. And of course, the worst is the children who get sick, and what's going on. I think it's. There's just a crisis. It's really a humanitarian crisis, and people are becoming refugees, but without a place to go to. Right. They just, everyone. It's the same in every country, and people do not have how to escape this radiation. People are extremely sick. People losing everything they have. People do not have how to support themselves financially. The system is outrageously not only not supporting these people, but trying to present them as people suffering from mental diseases. It's very cruel what's going on, very cruel.
Well, Dafna, personally, I'm after what you've discussed here, I'm seeing your efforts in the Israeli court system as just immensely important. It could be the biggest precedent ever with this issue if they rule in your favor. But even if they don't rule in your favor, just the effort you made is priceless. And I love the way you spelled out every step that you took. The whole process you had to go through over years was so fascinating to listen to, and I hope people absorb that, because you should be used as an example so people understand what it's going to take to make change happen in our court system.
Well, I do hope that it will be easier and easier for people to create a change. But I think there's one sentence I really love to quote. It's by Theodore Roosevelt, and he said, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." And I'm really happy because a lot of people do that, and and I believe change will come, and change is coming, and change is happening. It may be slower than what we want, slower than what we need, but it is happening. And I was just posting today on Facebook that there is an amazing physics professor. His name is Professor Klaus Buchner from Germany, and he wrote he did a very interesting research on the impact of cell towers on children. And he found that they are creating severe changes in their adrenal system, and that maybe can also explain, among other things, explain the huge increase in ADD. And he decided to run for the European Parliament, and he was actually elected last month for the European Parliament. So I guess
what was
that's
his
another
name?
representative that is going to speak about those issues.
And what was his name, Dafna, just so everybody...
And it's Klaus Buchner.
Klaus Buchner. And
Yeah.
he was elected to European Parliament?
Yes.
Well, that's very important.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
important.
So, and as you may have heard, Martin Witterhole from WIP Initiative is running for mayor of his town. So things happening, and people are becoming aware. And I think, as you said, even if we would not be successful in getting the permanent injunction, I think that we created enough impact that this issue is not going to get off the headlines. The media in Israel was very supportive. The media is constantly writing on it. There's hundreds of parents across Israel in various schools fighting to remove the Wi-Fi from their children's school. Too many people and children are sick for this issue to be silent. So whether or not we succeed, as far as I'm concerned, we succeeded.
Yes.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, we agree.
Absolutely, it's a glorious success. It just the as far as you've gotten so far is a tremendous precedent and example.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, in closing, if you will just give your website name again so our listeners can be sure to check out everything about you.
It's called EHS Fight Back.
EHS Fight Back.
And you are indeed fighting,
Yes,
and I can't think of a better person to do this than an attorney like yourself.
Thank you very much, and I hope we all be well, and good luck, and thank you.
In the restaurant, hear it sing that trendy cell phone. Nothing really matters but your cell phone. Cell phone. Cell phone.
I want to share a quick cell phone story. Recently, I stopped into a Chipotle's on the way to the radio station to tape a show. There were 27 people in line, and yes, I counted them. As they waited in silence to place their orders, each and every one of them were feverishly absorbed by their cell phones.
In the restaurant, hear it sing that trendy cell phone.
No one spoke. As I watched the love-making in front of my very eyes, I wondered out loud to Bob, what is going on here? Look at these people. They are zombies, hunched over, two-thumbed, glassy-eyed, non-speaking zombies. And I asked, is this an addiction? Should we really characterize the intense consumer devotion to the cell phone as an addiction? A recent experiment using neuroimaging technology suggests that drug-related terms like addiction and fix aren't as scientifically accurate as a word we use to describe our most cherished personal relationships. And that word is love. So I set out to research this bizarre behavior, and here is something I found. It is an op-ed that appeared in print on October 1st, 2011 in the New York Times on page A21 of the New York edition, with the headline, "You Love Your iPhone." Literally. The author is Martin Lindstrom. He is also the author of a book, Brand Washed, Tricks Companies Use to Manipulate Our Minds and to Persuade Us to Buy. Now, in fairness, I also found others who disputed his words, but something is going on here, and I think his thoughts warrant some consideration. He writes, friends who have accidentally left home without their iPhones tell me they feel stressed out, cut off, and somehow unwhole. That sounds a lot like separation anxiety to me. Not long ago, I headed an effort to identify the 10 most powerful affecting sounds in the world. I found that a vibrating phone came in third, behind only the Intel chime and the sound of a baby giggling. Phantom vibration syndrome is the term I use to describe our habit of scrambling for cell phone we feel rippling in our pocket, only to find we are mistaken. And this is me talking. If you recall, I did a little segment on Speak Up and Stay Alive, Patient Safety Radio, on the faux cell alarm and ringxiety. All right, back to Martin. He says, similar to pressing an elevator button repeatedly in the belief that the elevator will descend sooner, we check our phones for emails and texts countless times a day, almost as if we will others to text, call, email, or Skype us. So, are our smartphones addictive, medically speaking? Some psychologists suggest that using our iPhones and Blackberries may tap into the same associative learning pathways in the brain that make other compulsive behaviors, like gambling, so addictive. As with addiction to drugs or cigarettes or food, the chemical driver of this process is the feel-good neurotransmitter dopamine. He continues, earlier this year I carried out an fMRI experiment to find out whether iPhones were really, truly addictive, no less so than alcohol, cocaine, shopping, or video games. In conjunction with the San Diego-based firm MindSign Neuromarketing, I enlisted 8 men and 8 women between the ages of 18 and 25. Our 16 subjects were exposed separately to audio and to video of a ringing and vibrating iPhone. In each instance, the results showed activation in both the audio and visual cortices of the subjects' brains. In other words, when they were exposed to the video, our subjects' brains didn't just see the vibrating iPhone, they heard it too. And when they were exposed to the audio, they also saw it. This powerful cross-sensory phenomenon is known as synesthesia. But most striking of all was the flurry of activation in the insular cortex of the brain, which is associated with feelings of love and compassion. The subjects' brains responded to the sound of their phones as they would respond to the presence or proximity of a girlfriend, boyfriend, or family member. In short, the subjects didn't demonstrate the classic brain-based signs of addiction. Instead, they loved their iPhones. As we embrace new technology that does everything but kiss us on the mouth, we risk cutting ourselves off from human interaction. For many, the iPhone has become a best friend, partner, lifeline, companion, and yes, even a Valentine. The man or woman we love most may be seated across from us in a romantic Paris bistro, but his 8 GB, 16 GB, or 32 GB rival lies in wait inside our pockets and purses. My best advice? Shut off your phone, order some good champagne, and find love and compassion the old-fashioned way.
Cell phone, cell phone, cell phone, cell phone, cell phone.
Well, thank you for joining us on Boil the Frog Slowly Radio. Please come back next week, and for more information, go to the website boilthefrogradio.com. And until next week, remember to practice safe phone.
Boil the frog slowly, you're a frog in a pot. Turn up the heat and things will get hot. Will you jump out or will you burn? Listen to the show and you will return to Boil the Frog slowly.